collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, we'll talk at length about whether or not the government scheme which aims to help vulnerable defaulters on their mortgages is actually fit for purpose.
That includes a borrower who has never ever paid anything towards his loan, not a single installment, so that's the very definition of a strategic defaulter actually. It also includes a household which has been trying to pay its installments, but has been in default for, say, 3 or 4 months.
Women from Northern Ireland have been in Cyprus this week to see whether or not their experiences of helping the peace process there can help us in Cyprus.
Because I was here 15 years ago when Cyprus was full of hope. And it's quite depressing to be here at the minute where people are full of despondency.
And St Paul's Anglican Cathedral is getting ready for its 125th anniversary celebrations.
The highlight is going to be at 3 o'clock when Bishop Michael, our diocesan bishop, is going to dedicate and bless a new stained glass window because it's called St Paul's and I don't think we have a window with St Paul in it.
Anybody who's followed the financial situation in Cyprus over recent years will know that since the crisis, we've had a lot of problems with non-performing loans or NPLs. They are rarely out of the media one way or the other. Part of the problem was the fact that our Parliament delayed and then forestalled any laws on foreclosures to try and reduce NPLs, and that's been going on for years. Well, it finally did change, and so the government came up with an idea that it said would be helping people who were caught by their NPLs. Well, the Estia, as it's known, scheme is perhaps not all that it's cracked up to be. Joining us on the programme this week is financial analyst Renos Ioannidis. Renos, you had an article in the Sunday Mail recently that said Estia is not fit for purpose. I think a lot of people have suspected this, but you put it down very clearly. So for non-financial minds, let's start off with what the problems are.
Good to be with you, Rosie. The Estia scheme actually refers to loans which are collateralized with primary residences. And as we well know in Cyprus, a lot of people have their primary residence mortgaged for personal loans, small business loans, and so on and so forth. And we also know that the NPL ratio for these loans is in excess of 50%. So more than 1 in 2 of these loans have actually gone into non-performing loans. So what the government is trying to achieve with this scheme is to assist, support and protect vulnerable households, as they have called them, vulnerable households, who have actually mortgaged their houses for their loans. Now, if one looks at the criteria that have been set down, these are mainly 4. First one, a household must have a declared gross income of 50,000 euros to be eligible for this scheme. Second, their primary house, which is mortgaged for loans, must have a maximum market value of 350,000 euros. Third criterion, these households are allowed to have other assets which have a net value, and I will explain what net value means, of up to 125% of the value of the primary residence. So what this in effect means is that a household with a home valued at 350,000 and other assets valued up to 125% of that, which is 427,000, is still eligible for this scheme.
Where does that put people who've got 2 houses?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people have mortgaged their primary residence to buy a home on the coast, perhaps.
Yeah, that covers them. as well. So these people are still eligible for the STIA scheme. And what's even more important is the net value definition of other assets. Net value being the gross value of the other assets minus any loans they have on those assets. So, for example...
Sorry, let me just get my head around this. It sounds, if I understood this correctly, and I'm not a financial brain by any means, that the more loans you have out, then the more likely you are to get help.
Yeah, it could work like that. And let us take an example. A household may have other assets valued at 1 million. It has loans secured on those assets of 600,000. So that leaves a net value of 400,000. They are eligible for this scheme. So in effect, you're right. Yes, if you've got lots of assets and lots of loans, you are still made eligible for this scheme.
Right, we'll come in a minute to how unfair that's going to be for certain people and how very advantageous it's going to be, I think, for others. What do we mean by this scheme? Because it's the taxpayer that's picking up some of the loan, is it not?
Yeah. So what the scheme proposes to do is to take the loan which is collateralized on the primary residence, write the loan down to the value of the primary residence. So if the loan is 500,000 and the value of the primary residence is 350,000, the loan will be immediately written down to 350,000, and that will be borne by the banks. Okay, they will write down the loan by 150,000.
Well, have they gone along with this?
They are, because this amount has already been provided for in their accounts, even more than that actually. Because what banks do when they do their annual impairment provisions, they take the values of the assets they have and they actually discount those values to a lower amount. So in this instance, they will simply be writing down the loan to the market value, not the discounted market value, to the market value. So they've already taken the hit in their profit and loss account.
Why don't we all go out and mortgage our primary residences and get loans?
Because this is not going to happen again, they say. That's what they claim. It's once and for all scheme. But in effect, this is what's going to happen. The loans will be written down to the market value of the primary residence, and then the borrower will have to be paying 2/3 of the rescheduled loan every month, of the installment on the rescheduled loan, and then the taxpayer, the state, is going to subsidize the 1/3 of the monthly installments on that rescheduled loan.
What happens if somebody enters this scheme really to take advantage of it? Because I can see a lot of examples, and you gave some in the newspaper, that means people who are actually very wealthy are going to benefit greatly. What happens, though, if they don't pay every single month? Is there a penalty?
Yes, the scheme ceases to be valid, and the bank will have to foreclose on the property. This is what the scheme says. But all these people who will take advantage of this scheme, assuming that they will keep up with paying their rescheduled loans, they will have already benefited from the write-down of the loan, and they will have 1/3 of their monthly installments subsidized by the state or the taxpayer.
Can you elaborate on the examples that you gave in the newspaper of a hard-working family of 6 and a self-employed professional?
Yeah, what this scheme does not do is take into account the actual structure, the actual setup, and the size of the household. It just says an annual gross income of 50,000, irrespective of whether that includes 6 people within the household or just one person.
Does it mean that a husband and wife add up to 50,000, for example?
Yes, it's the household income. It means the household income. So one of the examples I have given is a young professional who has his own practice, and he declares an income of up to 50,000. That person is equalized to a family of 6 4 dependent children, 1 husband who is in employment and an unemployed wife, and the 2 households are exactly the same for the purposes of the Estia scheme.
What about if you're aware of any checks going on those, in this case, single professional, about what tax they have declared? Because again, we know that there is not a lot of investigation into who's declaring what in tax, and looking at, does he drive a fancy car, and he's got a penthouse flat somewhere as well as, are we pulling the strings together to make sure that this is not being of benefit to people who really don't deserve it?
Yeah, every borrower who will want to join the scheme will have to declare his income and his assets, all his assets. And those assets can actually be cross-checked with the Lands Registry Office or the Motor Vehicles Office, etc. When it comes to the income, though, it's just the income declaration. It's not a tax clearance certificate. It's the declared income by each borrower, which cannot actually be corroborated in any other way.
Well, surely the tax people can have a look at their books and say, he's paying this on that?
Yeah, they should be doing that even without the Estia scheme, but they are not, as we very well know. They are so overloaded at the tax department that they are not really looking into this kind of detail.
All right, let's move on to the fact that you came up with some ideas as to how the Estia scheme should be tweaked, if you like, to make it fairer and more fit for purpose, because it wasn't really, or perhaps it was, to help those who don't need the help.
Yeah, I think that the first thing that should be changed on the scheme should be to relate the criteria to the household size and the household structure. That would be extremely important to do, because I think it's very clear that the family of 6 will have higher reasonable living expenses compared to the household of a single professional person. So that's the first thing that it should be doing, both in terms of income and in terms of the value of the primary residence. Secondly, I think that other assets, the value of other assets, should be reduced substantially. I mean, we cannot have the household having a primary residence of 350,000 and other assets valued at 1 million minus 600 of other loans.
If you've got 4 cars, you can sell 3 of them, can't you, and pay off your debt?
Of course you can, yes, exactly. So that amount should come down. I mean, the 125% criterion on the market value of the primary residence is way too high. I would have it in an absolute number, say 100,000 in other assets. And then thirdly, there's a big chunk of the population who may be eligible for this scheme, but will not be able to cover the 2/3 of the rescheduled loan installment.
So they'll lose their house anyway?
Yeah, so these, in my mind, are the truly deprived households that a social scheme should be trying to protect. So what would happen to these people if they cannot service the reduced loan with a 2/3 installment per month? The scheme just says that their property has to be foreclosed. So how are we protecting these truly deprived households with this scheme? So what I am suggesting is change the criteria of the Estia scheme to make it fit for purpose, but also introduce some other social schemes, such as mortgage to rent, which has worked very well in other countries, such as the UK or Ireland, whereby the state buys the house of the borrower, leases it back to the borrower at a very low rental, and the borrower has the right to repurchase the house sometime in the future. Now, what that achieves, it keeps households in their homes, it removes the stigma of bankruptcy foreclosure, and it removes any psychological side effects from having to move house. Because when this is done, nobody will know about it. It's just the borrower who will know about this scheme of arrangement with the government.
Do you know whether anybody has suggested this to the government and what the reaction's been?
No, I'm not sure about that. I've written extensively about that. I have actually sent a memo to the ministry, but we haven't got anywhere with that.
I'm very bothered by the fact that I know for years in Cyprus we've had this idea that you, and the banks are to blame largely, that you can borrow what on earth you like and it's okay, we'll sort it out when you pay it back and so on and so forth. But when you've got people who've got second, sometimes third homes, surely the logic, and it should be in the law, is that if you're defaulting on your loan, then you must sell one or other of your properties to pay off what you've borrowed.
That's very reasonable, isn't it, and very fair, but this is not what the STS scheme is suggesting actually. There's another thing that we shouldn't forget about this scheme. This scheme actually covers all borrowers who, at the end of September 2017, had their loans in default for over 90 days. Now, that includes a borrower who has never, ever paid anything towards his loan from origination.
Not a single instalment.
Not a single installment. So that's the very definition of a strategic defaulter, actually. It also includes a household which has been trying to pay its installments, but has been in default for, say, 3 or 4 months. It also ignores all those households which have actually been keeping up with their loan repayments, having reduced their living expenses, having changed their lifestyle. Now, that is not fair nor equitable.
So where does that leave the family that has tried to change its lifestyle, doesn't go out for meals, doesn't take the kids swimming or whatever it happens to be, in order to keep paying their loans? They're not eligible at all?
No, not at all. They are not eligible.
Well, you've just got to wonder, haven't you, at what the idea behind the STS scheme was. Do we know who came up with this?
No, we don't.
Be very interesting to find out. But this is the scheme anyway, and it was tweaked, I think, by the MPs before they passed it, which begs the question, I suppose, whether we ought to be looking into who actually is benefiting from it. It's fascinating stuff, and I'm sure we will be hearing more, but it looks like the people who are really going to profit from the STS scheme are those who shouldn't be profiting. Those who are going to get hit are the vulnerable, and of course, as ever, this is Cyprus, the taxpayer. We've been talking to financial analyst Rennos Ioannidis.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Earlier this week there was a screening of a film about women peacekeepers from Northern Ireland. Wave Goodbye to Dinosaurs tells the story of the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition, one of the co-founders of which is Professor Monica McWilliams, who joins me now. Monica, how did you get involved with founding this women's movement in Northern Ireland, which has been, I think, very successful?
Yes, it was so successful that I became one of the 3% of women in the world to sign a peace agreement. So not only was I a negotiator representing the Women's Coalition at the table, but I was also a signatory to the agreement when we reached it. But how did we get there? Well, the film tells that story, and it's a story of how hundreds of women came together over 20 years. We didn't fall out of the clouds, as some of the politicians thought we had. And we built on those networks, and we built a circle of influence, all different skills, facilitators, mediators, negotiators, over the conflict, over the interface, over the peace walls, over lots of contentious issues. We realised on a bi-communal level that we needed to engage in dialogue and take some action together to stop a reoccurrence of the conflict in those communities.
Do you think that it's easier for women to do that than it is for men? We tend to be, dare I suggest, less confrontational.
Yeah,
although we can be stubborn, of course.
Yeah, there's nothing essential about our biology that suddenly makes us into better peacekeepers or builders. But I think we're accustomed to it because of our socialisation. We're expected to be nurturers and carers, and we sort the rows out between brothers and sisters and even with our neighbours sometimes. So sometimes we're more socialised into that, but also I think we had the experience of wanting to do it because we perhaps potentially were less likely to be shot dead. That many of the men, and I had this experience when men came into the coalition to help us, they potentially were very dangerous positions because some of them were out canvassing and came back and told me they had been threatened. And so we said, don't go out at night again, we will go out. And so perhaps they were less likely to shoot us. But that wasn't always the case. We were extremely, well, let's say brave and courageous. And we did put ourselves in very difficult positions in order to get our message across. So really what I'm saying is that we came from all these different backgrounds, and some women actually had become combatants. They were part of the armed groups. So again, that's in every conflict. But we chose to start to be peace builders. We never thought we'd actually be potentially develop into a political party. We weren't asked to come to the table. Nobody appointed us. A window opened up for 10 political parties, and we knew we had done enough work over the previous 2 decades of building those networks that if we stood for election, we potentially could get elected, and that's exactly what happened inside 6 weeks.
Right, now, once you had the agreement, of course, the sustainability of any peace agreement is paramount, isn't it? How much work has to go into that? Because everybody seems to think that, oh, we've got the agreement. But can I suggest to you that's the beginning of the road, not the end?
Well, the day we signed the agreement, we said the hard work starts now. I remember coming home that night after I'd signed it, and I hadn't been to bed for 3 nights and 3 days, and my younger sons both said, what happens now? Is all the killing going to stop? And I said, no, not necessarily. And is all the rioting over parades and protests going to end? No. So they said, well, what did you sign today? And so all we signed was the potential for how we'd like to live in the future. But then you have to make that real and deliver it. So we made these promises. And how do you deliver and enforce what you promise? And that was the 3rd stage and the most difficult. We talk about managing the conflict, which is what peace talks are. We talk about resolving the conflict, which is what the political settlement was. And then we talk about transforming the conflict, which is about reconciliation and reaching a position where we can coexist together in a different way. And we're still at that 2 decades later. I'm still as busy today as I was the day I signed the agreement.
So it's not a quick fix. People should understand that. But you've worked in many other countries since, I think, from South America, the Middle East and whatever. So can you just give me an overview of what you think it is that women in particular can offer? Because I think it's fairly well documented, and there's been research, that the fact that if women are not included in peace processes, as a rule, they don't last.
That's right. Most of the political settlements that have been made, unfortunately, tend to break down within 5 years if they don't have civic society involvement, if they're not inclusive. And what I see in Cyprus is a pretty exclusive process. In Colombia, it started out that way with the FARC, the armed group, and the government. And then they realised they had to open it up, and they formed a gender committee and invited submissions from the women. And the group I worked with was called the 1 Million Women's Movement. They have 46 million people. And that was very, very positive development. And it's much needed because they're building from the ground up. We say you need connectors, and women are connectors. We spend our lives making connections. You need communicators, and women make good journalists. They make for good communications. They keep it simple. They translate from English into English. In terms of our agreement and the referendum when we went to the people, that's what we did from door to door, from village to village. And you need good cheerleaders because there's lots of spoilers. And I'm not saying that women are Pollyannas, which we're accused of, as dreamers or utopias. No, we're practical people. And we know that it's pragmatism that makes for peace. We don't give up, we persist, and we've lots of patience because we know what it's like to get setbacks, and we pick ourselves up and we go on. And so that's what we bring to the table, and that's what we bring to building peace. And those are really important, to have cheerleaders, to have connectors, to have communicators. Build all those together and you've got a strong team on your side.
Well, it worked in Ireland. Hopefully it will also work in Cyprus.
I will come back in 15 years' time and see again how far it has advanced, because I was here 15 years ago when Cyprus was full of hope. And it's quite depressing to be here at the minute where people are full of despondency. But, you know, intransigence is not a good place to be. A stalemate hurts both sides. So I'll come back in 15 years and say, this was their Good Friday.
Let's certainly hope so. We've been talking to Professor Monica McWilliams, an academic, mediator and co-founder of the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition. Next weekend is the 125th anniversary of St Paul's Anglican Cathedral in Nicosia. It's a centre for all faiths, actually, and they've got a weekend of activities to mark the anniversary. Joining us to tell us what's planned is the Dean, Jeremy Crocker. So, Jeremy, it's 125 years. I mean, that's extraordinary, really, in a way, because, well, Cyprus isn't that old in a sense in terms of an Anglican community, but this has been the centre socially and in terms of faith for many, many years.
Yes, and 25 years ago, Her Majesty the Queen kindly came, and I understand it was a wonderful occasion for all and for everyone. And the foundation stone was laid 125 years ago, and I thought it was a wonderful opportunity to mark it, but also to bring in many peoples, I hope, who do come regularly to the cathedral, but also are linked and involved in all sorts of other ways. So it's a wonderful celebration weekend where we've got a piano recital. I'm very much looking forward to that. We have a German pianist, organist who's wonderful at playing the piano, so that launches us. And then a reception where I've invited folk from all the walks of life that I hope in Nicosia, ambassadors, benefactors, supporters, workers, worshippers, all sorts of, and the different Christian faiths that function in Nicosia to come. So I hope we have a wonderful big different gathering and a few speeches just to commend where we're at and what we've done and our future. Then we're going to go into the church, those who want to, and sing some very well-known songs and hymns and just to have a songs of praise. And then the next day, the highlight is going to be at 3 o'clock when Bishop Michael, our diocesan bishop, is going to dedicate and bless a new stained glass window, because it's called St Paul's, and I don't think we have a window with St Paul in it. So we've had made from the UK, and it will be unveiled then in the first window as you walk into the cathedral. And I think that'll be a nice way of marking a significant time in the life of this cathedral in the city of Nicosia.
So whose idea was it to dedicate a window, commission a window in honour of St Paul?
I hope I'm right in saying it was me. I think it was me that I wanted to do something like that.
How did you choose the artist?
I have a deputy warden called Maria Evangelou, and it's someone she knew. We've seen ideas from her. The council were delighted with her design, and it's just been completed, and she's flying out with the stained glass window on her lap, I believe, and then it's going to be slowly put into the window. I want to put a curtain over it so no one can see it until Sunday at 3. And then I'm doing a reception in the deanery, which I don't do a lot of, that everyone's welcome after it to come and have cake, coffee and wine to mark this significant weekend. We're hoping also, as part of this 125th, to have a few musical concerts up to and towards Christmas. And then in the new year we're discussing between ourselves what it means to be Anglican, because the congregation are from everywhere, and Many are not Anglican, but they worship and attend St Paul's Cathedral. But they're from all over the place and all sorts of backgrounds. So I want to do a little bit of study to try and tell them what actually being Anglican means. Because I bet most of them haven't got a clue.
Well, they'll soon find out, I've no doubt. That's Jeremy Crocker, Dean of St Paul's Anglican Cathedral in Nicosia, which on Saturday the 6th of October and Sunday the 7th have pretty full days both days to mark the 125th anniversary of the cathedral. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.